Destroy Media Narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now time for, yes, the Thursday night edition of the Gaggle live stream. Welcome everybody who has joined me. Really appreciate your being here. I noticed just looking at the first comments that all pertain to the Scott Ritter interview from yesterday. I'm going to come to that in the maybe in the part where we just talk to the Gagglers and their opinions about the Scott Ritter interview. I thought it was, obviously interesting as and entertaining as always with Scott. The the accuracy of his forecast, however, is a different matter entirely. But before we get to that, I want to discuss a few items that are in the news, and I want to start today with a a story oddly enough coming out of Paris. So at various points during the last couple of years, I've come across this campaign that's being waged against one Xenia Fedorova, who is a kind of a Russian influencer who lives in Paris, and she used to run RT France before, of course, it was closed down in 2022. But strangely enough, she has continued to live in Paris and continued to be a spokesman and a commentator on NATO and Russia and Ukraine. And she has done that by making use of the platform provided by the Vincent Bolloré media group. Bolloré is a kind of French Rupert Murdoch type, quite rather conservative. The politics is obviously far more sophisticated than that of Rupert Murdoch, but nonetheless, he has given Xenia Fedorova a platform, even as these attacks against her in particular, have been mounting, and particularly over the past 12 months. And the people mounting this attack on Fedorova have all come from the kind of leftish, center left, the sort of Macronist. Somebody has written it out exactly. Xenia Fedorova, exactly right. Let Dasein live. And so and now. And after a lot of pressure has been building on the French government that they have to do something, got to do something about this woman. We can't have her commenting on the news for the Bolloré media group, and particularly him, particularly this right wing guy in France. So something's got to be done about her. Particularly, she's got to be kicked out of France. And the French government has indeed finally arrived at the conclusion that Fedorova has to go. She has to leave France. She's so dangerous to the French body politic that she's such a threat to France because she's a mouthpiece of the Kremlin or whatever the hell she is, that she has to leave France. And in the meantime, as she files her appeal, she has to be under house arrest and has to, I think, report to the police every day. Now, what I think is so striking about these kinds of stories is the revelation of just how little interest there is among journalists, among media personalities, among politicians, among the cognoscenti, the political media elites, how little interest there is among them for free speech. By and large, there's just rejoicing at the French government's decision, and when you ask, well, what's the justification for kicking out this woman? Well, she's a threat to whatever democracy, because she's a spokesman for the Kremlin, or whatever the hell she is. But of course, the argument is, well, even, are we at war with Russia? Now, of course, when you ask that question, the answer is told, well, no, we're not at war with Russia. Well, if we're not at war with Russia, then why exactly are all voices that may be sympathetic to Russia, why are they being silenced? Why must somebody who lives legally in France, I mean, she's basically, has enjoyed a legal status, so she has legal residence, which has been extended time and again. Why must she be thrown out of France? Why must she be deplatformed just because she's expressing views sympathetic to the Kremlin? So if we're at war with Russia, maybe there might be a justification that such voices need to be stilled. But if we're not at war with Russia, then what is the justification? Now, of course, these Kaya Kallas, von der Leyen, Merz, and all the scumbags who run Europe, they always play cutesy. They never really answer that question, are we at war with Russia? Because if we are at war with Russia, then I think then everything is on the table. And then you have to go before your public and justify why you've got your country into a war with Russia. What was the basis for it? What was the justification for another war on Russia? We had a couple of those in the 20th century. We had one in the 19th century. Well, we had a couple of those in the 19th century. But then you say, well, why did you do this? Why did you lead your country into a war with Russia? So that you have to answer that question. But they don't want to do it for the obvious reason that the public is under the impression that we're not at war with Russia. So they play this cutesy game whereby they talk big and bluster this, that, and the other about Russia, how the dangers of the Kremlin, they're threatened to our democracy. We mustn't allow the Kremlin to get a platform in our free democratic societies, because our democracies may collapse under the weight of Kremlin propaganda. And then they turn around and say, well, we're not actually at war with Russia. Don't worry about anything. So, it's like now you see it, now you don't. We're at war with Russia, but no, we're not at war with Russia. And so, and it's very cute. It's a cute little game that they can play, whereby they can threaten people. They can, obviously, they sanction people, punish them quite harshly, because it's as if they are consorting with the enemy, that they're acting treasonously, and then which suggests that we are at war with Russia. But then they turn around, oh no, we're not at war with Russia. No. Heaven forbid that anyone should even dream of suggesting that we're at war with Russia. And as we'll see later in this podcast, we had another one of these ridiculous Russian missile. Supposedly, we never know with these professional liars, otherwise known as NATO. We never know with them whether it's true. But now apparently there was a Russian missile that landed in Poland, and then the usual indignation, Merz, Macron, the whole gang, is fulminating. So why are you fulminating? If we're at war with Russia, then that's what you would expect. So apparently now we're not at war with Russia. So we're at war with Russia when we silence people, when we sanction them, when we punish them. Then we're at war with Russia. But now a missile lands in Poland. Well, we now know, well, this is outrageous because we're not at war with Russia. So anyway, here here's just a sampling And I think what I want to highlight here, why what we're dealing with truly scum, low life creatures, is that these liberal opinion, it's about liberté, égalité, fraternité, the usual stuff. Um, they don't give a damn at, at all about free speech. If I don't agree with it, if I don't like it, I want it banned. And in the name of liberty, in the name of democracy, and the worst, the lowest of these scumbags is Reporters Without Borders. So Reporters Without Borders is supposedly this outfit defending journalism. Yet Reporters Without Borders is the worst of the organizations that attack journalism, that attack the very principle of free speech. And so they are the ones who are clapping gleefully. Great, Xenia, Fedorova, boom, gone. And that's Reporters Without Borders that supports this. Anyway, so let's just first of all look at the media coverage of this. And here we have France 24, accused of being a Kremlin propagandist, a Russian columnist, Xenia Fedorova is the target of an expulsion order. And then Jared Bernard, former head of the Russian channel RT in France, banned in the EU since March 2022, and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Xenia Fedorova regularly defends the Kremlin's position in the media under the control of Vincent Bolloré. So he's the bad guy. So when you read these stories, you're told, well, who are the bad guys? Who's the bad guy here? Well, it's this guy Vincent Bolloré. And of course, if you follow the European media, like the Guardian, Politico, Financial Times, they're always telling you this is a really bad guy. I mean, generally, you probably don't know much about him. I mean, I don't know, he's some French media entrepreneur, but somehow he turned into a bad guy who apparently is far right, like Murdoch, supposedly, but he platforms Xenia Fedorova, and that is just this horrific, terrible thing to do. I mean, so in other words, you allow her apparently to have a column and to put her, on your TV channel. That's too much. And of course, leading the charge are the liberals in France, the liberal media, like and particularly all these French politicians. And yeah, this says she appears on C News and Europe One. These are owned by Bolloré, and writes a column for the weekly newspaper JD News as a journal du dimanche. The columnist was given a ministerial deportation order on Wednesday, and then it says here's a Politico story. Of course, France issues expulsion order against Russian TV star Xenia Fedorova. Former head of RT France is accused of spreading Kremlin propaganda in French media. And then here we are, and then it says Fedorova, former head of the Kremlin-backed RT France news outlet, was handed an expulsion order by the Paris Préfecture of Police, which handles immigration matters for foreigners living in the French capital. And then this is the document. This is the indicting document. By spreading her narratives, Xenia Fedorova acts as a conduit for disinformation campaigns led by Russian authorities with the aim of destabilizing public order. I don't even know what any of that means. I don't know if anyone else understands. She spreads her narratives, and by doing so, she's acting as a conduit for disinformation campaigns led by Russian authorities, um, with the aim of destabilizing public order in France. And it accuses Fedorova of contributing to the spread of disinformation and destabilization in order to manipulate public opinion. Now, of course, anyone who's a commentator will always be in the business of manipulating public opinion. I mean, that's what you do. I mean, you talk, you try to persuade people. Sometimes it works, often it doesn't. But no, obviously you're trying to have an impact on public opinion. But here, we're suddenly we're have to think that there's something very dark and sinister that's going on. So Xenia Fedorova, and then later on in some of the stories, you get the link between Xenia Fedorova and Marguerite Simonian, the head of RT. And so here, this goes on. The French Ministry of Interior told Politico the order to remove her from the country was signed on Tuesday. Xenia Fedorova did not immediately. Fedorova had anyway. And then he says Fedorova headed RT France before it was shut down due to EU sanctions in 2023. She has since become a fixture on the C News television channel, Europe 1 radio station, and Le Journal du Dimanche newspaper, all owned by conservative French billionaire Vincent Bolloré. As Politico previously reported, the TV star's commentary echoing Moscow talking points on Ukraine, NATO, and European security was raising concerns among lawmakers. Well, I hate to raise concerns among lawmakers. I mean, because they're obviously very, very much concerned themselves about free speech matters. Concerns about lawmakers and Russian propaganda experts. I wonder, does anyone know how does one become a Russian propaganda expert? I mean, you have to go to university, you have to study it and get a degree in Russian propaganda, and then you become a Russian propaganda expert. But apparently, it's one of those branches of academic study, Russian propaganda, like disinformation. Apparently, you can be a disinformation expert, and probably they're just specialized schools training people to become disinformation experts, and then they can be hired by various EU-funded think tanks, like the Center for Strategic Dialogue, and then many others. The Center for Countering Digital Hate. They're in the business of expertise on disinformation. Anyway, so then it says a president. Le Monde also reported, and Le Monde has been leading the charge here. Le Monde also reported Fedorova has allegedly grown very close to Bolloré. Oh, they've grown very close. A powerful figure who has been leveraging his media empire to try and influence French politics. And then in her coverage on Bolloré's platforms, Fedorova has often accused French President Emmanuel Macron and NATO of warmongering, presenting Russia as a peaceful country looking to end the war in Ukraine. She also regularly criticizes Ukrainian President Zelensky and depicts the country as corrupt and incapable of winning the war. Those are outrageous things to say. I mean, it's just outrageous. This country is corrupt and incapable of winning the war. Anyway, then in Brussels, some members of the European Parliament have been unsuccessfully lobbying for Fedorova to be included in the EU's Russian sanctions packages, while several lawmakers in Paris have pushed for her residence permits to be revoked. Now, this has been going on for some time. And the number you can see on the Twitter feed for quite some time, various French politicians, often female, I should say, often female French politicians, who have been obsessing about Xenia Fedorova. And so already, so then Fedorova is now under house arrest and banned from working on French soil. However, according to Libération, the lack of diplomatic ties between Paris and Moscow will make it difficult to actually deport her back to Russia. Um, and then this has been one of the women who's been leading this campaign against Fedorova, Valérie Chayer. She's one of Macron's people. She's in Macron's party. The expulsion order targeting Xenia Fedorova, a pro-Kremlin Russian columnist, confirms what we have been denouncing for months. Russian interference does not stop at our borders. It seeks to take root at the heart of our public debate. To which, of course, one might say, look, and so what? I mean, Russia may have influence. A lot of countries have influence. I mean, America has influence. Israel has influence. Other, countries have influence. I mean, again, this is the war, not war thing, which is there's something very sinister about the this Russian influence campaign. And then this Valerie says the Kremlin's propaganda is not just one opinion among others. Oh, it's not only just one opinion among others. Oh, why? What's different about it? When it is relayed without contradiction or context, it muddies the facts, erodes citizens' trust, and aims to undermine our democracy. So apparently, what they're saying is that when she writes a column, there has to be an immediate column underneath it or above it refuting everything she says. Okay. Does that apply to anybody else? Does it, when anybody else writes a column or a newspaper article, there immediately has to be a refutation, or she appears on television, there immediately has to be a refutation. Now, keep in mind, the mainstream media in France is very much like the mainstream media in the UK, the mainstream media in Germany. You get one monolithic opinion. You are told the Russians are terrible, Putin is awful, Ukraine is winning the war or whatever, and we have to give everything we can to Ukraine because that will bring Putin to the negotiating table, whatever the latest cliche says. So that's the monolithic opinion. I mean, that's largely what French mainstream opinion is like, what British mainstream opinion, what German mainstream opinion, and by and large, American mainstream opinion. So the whole idea that she's unchallenged, it's challenged throughout mainstream media. I mean, the notion that somebody expressing views that are presenting, let's say she presents Russia's side of the argument, which by and large has no place at all in French mainstream media, just because she presents the Russia side of the argument, that is just horrific. That is reprehensible. That the French politician, liberté, égalité, fraternité. We just had July the 14th. The French Revolution, whatever. But the truth is that the French despise democracy and free speech just as much as the British do. Even though they were on opposite sides during the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, but basically they're in agreement when it comes to free speech. We want as little of it as possible. Anyway, so this goes on. So then in the face of hybrid wars waged against Europe, so now we are at war with Russia. Or are we not at war? We are. Now you see, now you know. In the face of hybrid wars waged against Europe, we must defend our information space with the same resolve as our security by banning views that we don't like. Just say it. We want to ban views we don't like, and we'll call it hybrid war, defending our information space, or whatever dribble you want to call it. We don't even know what the hell information space is, but that's it. We're just going to ban it. We just ban speech we don't like. But why shouldn't we? I mean, why should we listen to views that we don't like? I mean, nobody particularly likes listening to views they don't like. Yeah, let's just ban it and let's kick her out of the country. Naivete is no longer an option. French and European authorities must now see it through to the end. Those who serve the Kremlin's interests by taking part in its influence operations must be held accountable. This all sounds very, very, sinister. What does she mean? Those who serve the Kremlin's interests by taking part in its influence operations must be held accountable. Like what? They're in prison? We must see it through to the end. And here's another one of these lefties. This is Raphael Glucksmann. Who is a French socialist, completely, totally uninteresting character. But he's someone who, whenever you watch these, French election coverage on France 24, and, those are the ones where everybody's sitting around the table and everybody's agreeing with everyone else because you only bring this sort of leftish, liberal lefties on and to sit around the table, and there's always the ubiquitous Raphael Glucksmann to spout what the cliches of the hour. So Raphael Glucksmann says Xenia Fedorova is the influence agent of a foreign tyranny. Okay, fine. And what should we do with her? What do you think we should do with her, Raphael? That multiplies destabilization operations against our democracy. Well, when you read a sentence like that, you always have to think that it doesn't say much for our democracy if it can't withstand comments by a young Russian woman. I mean, apparently it's so under threat. It's so we're hanging on by our fingernails that we just can't listen to this woman, this Xenia Fedorova. It's too much. I can't do it. And so the Glucksmann continues, and the nationalists who defend with such ardor a pawn in Russia's hybrid war against France are fake patriots. See pronounced well, the fake patriots. Now, these nationalists, the only arguments that I've heard, and there haven't been that many, but there have been some arguments defending her. They've defended her not because they're nationalist or the patriotic or whatever. They just say, hey, she should be allowed to speak. I mean, that's all. Why shouldn't she have a platform? Presumably, I can't say I follow this particularly, but she's obviously pretty good at it. Obviously she has a lot of language skills, so she can present her views in though she's Russian, but she can speak in French. And she wouldn't be on if she wasn't entertaining. Yeah, that's sort of, I think that's why Bolloré puts her on. She's entertaining. But but it's not enough that we have Le Monde. It's not enough that we have Le Figaro. It's not enough that we have L'Express, France 24, and everything else. We just have to ban others who don't agree with us. Anyway, this Raphael, and then we hear is Le Monde, who has been in the forefront of this campaign. It says how France came to issue an expulsion order against Russian propagandist Xenia Fedorova. And so how did this come about? And then she says, I just got off the phone with my brothers, one on Telegram, the other on WhatsApp. The internet is working in Russia, no gas shortages. This was the latest news Xenia Fedorova shared from her native country on July the 27th on her X account, deploring the supposed disinformation spread by the French media, in this case, L'Express, regarding the consequences of Ukraine's airstrikes in Moscow and elsewhere. Was it a defiant gesture? 2 days later, the pro-Putin propagandist, a regular contributor to Bolloré Group media outlets, was declared persona non grata in France. And then on Wednesday, the Ministry of the Interior ordered her immediate expulsion from French territory. This sovereign decision effectively revokes her residence permit and prohibits her from working in France. And so for France, the behavior of Xenia Fedorova, whose real name is Xenia Borchik, undermines the fundamental interests of the state, and her presence on French territory constitutes, for this reason, a particularly serious and current threat to public order. So this is the lengthy and detailed order, and then we got the lawyer says, that his client will immediately file an appeal against the serious attack on freedom of expression of a journalist who has always carried out her work in the most appropriate manner. And then how and why such an outcome after months of dithering? There's a lot of dithering going on. I mean, this Valérie Ayer has been demanding that she be expelled, and there have been others, Nathalie Loiseau, I'm not sure my pronunciation is correct. She's also been demanding Xenia's expulsion. Media pressure played a significant role. Oh, that's good. So Les Le Monde writing, media pressure played a significant role according to a memo published by the French Foreign Ministry. Savor that for the moment. The media have been pressuring the government to expel a journalist. That's what today's media. That's today's media, that they pressure the government, please, please, please expel a journalist. So rather than saying, well, all right, she's a journalist, we're journalists, we may not agree on very much, but nonetheless, she is a journalist, and we believe, at least in the principle, that journalists should be able to make a living. I mean, she's making a living. I mean, she's getting paid by the Bolloré Media Group. I mean, so she's not cheating anyone, not swindling anyone. She's making a living. She's getting paid by the Bolloré Media Group. So the journalists start applying pressure to the French government. Can you expel her, please? Please expel her. She's not like us. She's not one of us. Anyway, that memo published by the French Foreign Ministry. For over a year, the pro-Russian shift in Bolloré's media outlets had been raising questions. What kind of questions? So too had the increasingly militant propaganda of Ms. Fedorova, who disseminated Kremlin falsehoods. This is Le Monde. This is good journalism. Le Monde just simply says falsehoods. They don't tell us what these falsehoods are, but they just tell us what they're falsehoods. On C News, Europe 1, and in a column on Journal du Dimanche, spaces offered by Vincent to his protege, as she wrote in the acknowledgements of the uncorrected proofs of her book, to the point of becoming involved, as Le Monde revealed, in the pre-presidential campaign. She participated in the first meeting of the Christian think tank chaired by Vincent Bolloré at Vivendi headquarters, and wished for the success of this endeavor with the aim, as the organization's statute clearly say, of influencing the 2027 election. Anyway, so the Ministry of Interior got to work. Oh, that's nice. They got to work. Hey, now, how are we going to get her out of the country? In utmost secrecy. That's good. They worked on the most effective way to expel the Russian propagandist. The challenge was to find the right way to, quote, get this pro-Putin figure out of France without being overruled by the courts. Especially since, as the weeks went by, Xenia Fedorova was escalating her rhetoric each week, relaying Moscow's most outlandish lies verbatim, and interfering in French domestic politics. I love this. There isn't this sort of concept of interfering in French domestic politics. Anybody who comments on French domestic politics, I mean, if you say, I think Macron is a moron and a jerk, well, you're interfering in French domestic politics. I mean, it goes with the territory of speech. I mean, you say, yeah, I'm interfering with it because I just don't like Macron. But so somehow there's this concept, they want to suggest here that she's working for the Kremlin, and in doing so, she is interfering in French domestic politics, and escalating the falsehoods. And I mean, it's always very funny. What are these falsehoods? And then you say, well, okay, you may not agree with them. That doesn't make them a falsehood. But anyway, they have to present this as that she posed some serious threat to the security of France. Anyway, they said that she's interfering in the French domestic politics. The culmination, it seems, was the Bastille Day parade. So that was 2 weeks ago, where Xenia Fedorova saw in the participation of the coalition of the willing supporting Ukraine. You remember Zelensky showed up, as he always shows up everywhere. He was there on Bastille Day, supporting Ukraine under the watchful eye of Zelensky. A quote, a dangerous confusion between national tribute and strategic alliance. And then she indignantly declared in the Le Journal du Dimanche. And then the German Interior Ministry already knew she would be banned from entering German territory from 2024 due to her interference activities at the Russian news agency Rutli, where she had worked in Berlin before moving to Paris in 2017. Anyway, France has finally chosen to follow Berlin's lead. The C News and JD News commentator contributes to the dissemination of disinformation, destabilization. This is the decree of July 29th, aimed at manipulating public opinion, undermining confidence of European citizens, and in particular French citizens in their institution. You have to wonder, why is that so terrible, to undermine people's confidence in their institutions? I mean, why should people have confidence in their institutions? I mean, why should they have no confidence? I mean, but the notion that somehow it's a crime to undermine confidence in institutions, this has become the kind of the go-to response of the authorities, cheered on by the media. The media, you would think, will say, yeah, well, our job is to cast a jaundiced eye, a critical eye on our institutions. If it undermines confidence in institutions, well, so be it. We're doing our job. But no, apparently the journalists who had pressured the French government, please, please, please get her out. Apparently they're in agreement. Yeah, you don't want to go around undermining institutions. We love institutions. We think institutions should be supported as much as possible. Anyway, this continues, and and then the Minister of Interior accused her of two things: first, disinformation, of course, and systematic distortion of facts. Several media outlets have reported how Xenia Fedorova broadcasts Kremlin fake news every week on a French channel about the deportations of Ukrainian children, and simply described as humanitarian evacuations. Okay, I mean, whether you think it's fake news or not, that is, that's her argument, that's her point of view. If you don't like it, then refute her views. I mean, again, in the monolithic French media, That's always presented these Russian abduction of Ukrainian children. It's always presented as, oh, that the Russians had abducted them in order to bring them up as Russians, which is always was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous argument. And Xenia Fedorova doubtless argued, as many have argued, that the goal was not to bring them up as Russians, but the goal was to bring them to safety and to get them out of a war zone. There were small children who, may well have lost their parents, may have lost their families, and so they were just taken out of the war zone and to safety. And if their parents showed up or families showed up and said, we want our children back, then they'd be sent back. You can disagree with this, but the idea of just simply saying this is fake news, that doesn't cut it, because, and how do you know this is fake news? Well, we were told by the International Criminal Court that this is fake news, right? And we, being journalists, we just believe the first thing that we're told. I mean, that's what being a journalist is. You just believe the first thing that you're told. Anyway, so then this article goes on. So there's every week on French channel about the deportation of Ukrainian children, Russian bombings of a Kiev cathedral. She called it the Western narrative, and that of course was nonsense. There was no bombing of a Kiev cathedral. Accuses the West of prolonging the conflict, and Latvia of glorifying Nazism. The Interior Ministry denounces this as a direct relay of disinformation campaigns orchestrated by the Kremlin, citing in support of selection of recent publications and statements by Ms. Fedorova. But the decree also mentions the destabilization strategy of the social fabric. The last thing we want to do is to destabilize the social fabric. I love social fabric. I mean, I want high quality fabric, and you can, something you can really hold on to. Social fabric and the threat to public order posed by this proxy of Moscow. For example, on July the 8th, in this Journal du Dimanche, Paris has gradually shifted from political and military support for Kiev to almost total identification with the Ukrainian cause. I don't quite see anything false there. I think that's correct as charged. But the French have never been clearly consulted on the exact limits of this commitment. Yes, quite. They've just been pushed into this without really thinking through the implications of identifying France wholly with Ukraine. Regarding the aid provided by France to Ukraine after the Russian aggression, for Ms. Fedorova, moreover, this is a special operation, and it is the West that decided to continue this conflict. And then the CNews contributor wasn't fooled. Such an escalation could end up alienating the government, even if she thought she could count on its high-level support. At the beginning of July, she was worried to see her name included in the 21st package of European sanctions, targeting some 200 individuals or entities linked to Russia's war against Ukraine. The entire media machine of the Breton businessman, of whom this 45-year-old, this is the Bolloré, of whom this 45-year-old woman knows and considers herself a protege, had rallied to the defense of the group's pro-Russian figurehead. And on July the 19th, Bolloré's Journal du Dimanche devoted its front page to the alleged threats to freedom of expression and interference by the European Union. I love the way alleged threats. I mean, is it alleged? I mean, it's pretty clear. By the European Union, while Fedorova defended her own case. On July the 22nd, she thought she could breathe a sigh of relief. The former head of RT France was ultimately not targeted by European sanctions. Remember, so it's very important to get the timeline here. So it looked for a while as if she would be listed in the 21st round of EU sanctions. She was ultimately not targeted by European sanctions, but in Le Monde, the interior minister and the foreign minister confided that they were studying other avenues for sanctions. Well, that's good. That's great. So if the EU didn't do the job, Kaya Kallas didn't do the job, the interior minister and the foreign minister would look for other avenues to harass her. So imagine they go into a lot of trouble to go after this 45-year-old woman, this Xenia Fedorova. You know, they got to sort of the interior minister, the foreign minister. We got to do something about her. Anyway, then. So that was that, and then here we goes on. Xenia Fedorova was residing in France thanks to a talent passport obtained in April 2017. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russia Today was banned from broadcasting in Europe and RT France was closed, but Xenia Fedorova continued to receive her salary from TV Novosti, RT's parent company. She also obtained a renewal of her residency permit, valid for 10 years, granted in August 2024. And then, according to Laurent Nunez, this is the interior minister, interviewed by Le Monde in May, it was an automatic renewal by the services of the Ministry of the Interior, never placed in the files of the police prefect's office, a position he held at the time. The minister knew Xenia Fedorova well, having received intelligence reports when he was Director General of Internal Security. Anyway, in Paris for about 10 years, Fedorova, who lived at the top of an elegant building on Boulevard Raspail with a view of the Eiffel Tower, tried to cultivate her network and attended Parisian social events. So this is the moment when you get to live vicariously, the life from Paris. This is the life that you're not enjoying yourself. This is Parisian social events, fancy restaurant, Boulevard Raspail. You look out of the window, you see the Eiffel Tower. This is, this is all made. It's all written with a view to make you hate her. You hate, God, this woman, this Kremlin propagandist is enjoying this life on the Boulevard Raspail. Why can't I live on the Boulevard Raspail? She also met with media executives in the salons of the George V Hotel. And then this is the quoting here. She also met, she received me shortly after her public altercation with Emmanuel Macron during the 2017 campaign in the private rooms, and she asked me, I believe you know Emmanuel Macron well. Could you arrange a meeting for me? Recounts a media executive. He didn't follow up. And then, anyway, then she says, among French ministers and elected officials, several, particularly on the left, had recently spoken out against Xenia Fedorova remaining in France. And so we have Marine Tondelier, National Secretary of the Greens, MP, so the Greens are always among the worst. MPs Arthur Delaporte and Sacha Houlier, and MEP Glucksmann, we've already seen him, he's the socialist, in the media, in the National Assembly, and at the European Parliament. And then Renew MP, this is Macron creature, Nathalie Loiseau, who had been vigorously campaigning for Fedorova's expulsion from Brussels. Not expulsion from, but I think she actually means that she was, because she was based in Brussels, so she was vigorously campaigning for Fedorova's expulsion. Immediately rejoiced on X. Here's her rejoicing. Miss Fedorova, the Russia of your dreams awaits you. The former diplomat quipped, I wonder what's stopping you from returning there without delay now that you're residing illegally in France. Why are you opposing your return to your motherland? Well, I mean, that's fine. I mean, but by the same token, as I can say about these people like Nathalie Loiseau, why are you here? Why aren't you fighting for Ukraine in Ukraine. I mean, Valerie Ayer, everyone, all of these Ukraine champions, they should stop living this comfy life in Paris. Very, very nice, but stop living in Paris. Rifle, backpack, Ukraine, and fight for Ukraine. Since that's what you care about, that you've made clear, it's the only thing in the world you care about. Then you need to go and fight for Ukraine. I mean, don't just hang out here and send out tweets about Xenia Fedorova and think that you've done a good job. I mean, you got to do more than that. It's not enough just trying to get Xenia Fedorova kicked out of France. And then we have Natalie who had been in the Nam, your motherland, and then as with the removal of Olivier Nora from the helm of Grasset, the entire leadership of the Bolloré group rallied together, offering their full support to Xenia Fedorova. While not everyone is necessarily obliged to share all the analysis and opinions expressed by Ms. Fedorova, the Canal Plus and La Jardier groups consider that preventing her from participating in public debate and expressing her views on the French and international situation would constitute a particularly serious attack on freedom of expression and the pluralism of opinion. This is the kind of thing that journalists do not accept, but this is the Bolloré group who said this. Anyway, here is this creature, Thibault Bretin. He's the director general of Reporters Sans Frontières, Reporters Without Borders. And so he gave this interview a little bit before, so I guess a couple of months ago. And naturally, as you would expect, the last thing on the mind of this guy who's the director general of Reporters Without Borders, the last thing is to defend the right of journalists to do their job. I mean, the right of journalists to report. I mean, that's the last thing you want to do. The right of people to express their opinions, even though you don't agree with them. You're not going to get Reporters Without Borders sticking out his neck for that. Anyway, this Thibault Bretin, Director General of Reporters Without Borders, which defends press freedom. Okay, enjoy that, savor that as we go on. Which defends press freedom and the right to reliable information. Which defends press freedom and the right to reliable information, points out that strategies aimed at ignoring the requirements of journalism in the name of free speech undermine the democratic framework. Now, this is the classic French gibberish. The French are very good at spouting gibberish. I mean, they always have. That's always been their forte. The gibberish, the whole point of this gibberish is to justify censorship, to justify the expulsion of journalists that you don't like, and the suppression of opinions you don't like. And the way you do this is when you say strategies aimed at ignoring the requirements of journalism. We don't know what these strategies are. What are the requirements of journalism in the name of free speech? Undermine the democratic framework. Now, you have to also keep in mind, first of all, there's nothing fancy about journalism. You basically you come along, you report something. You go out on the street, you report it, you interpret it, give your opinion. That's journalism. There's nothing fancy about that. That's journalism. Now, you can agree, you can disagree with what somebody has written, but that's basically it. What people like this creature, this Reporters Without Borders, are trying to do is they want to create this kind of something called journalism that they define. There's this essence, some essence of journalism that only they can understand. This essence of journalism that is violated by the people that they don't like. So they're not conforming to this essence of journalism. Whereas, as I say, journalism is just what you do when you report something, you film something, you write it up. That's journalism. That's all. But no, they have to learn there's something called journalism, and therefore, when you speak on behalf of of people doing journalism, you speak on their behalf, their right to free expression, their right to investigate and inquire into whatever they want to, then you're violating democracy. You don't know how. Why am I violating democracy? Well, it doesn't really matter. I'm a Frenchman and I just talk gibberish. I mean, that's what I do. I learned to talk gibberish from a very early age in the French universities. And so that's what he's saying here. Well, that this is undermining democracy because it's in the name of free speech. So that's the last thing we want to do is to talk about is free speech. Heaven forbid. Anyway, he then continues. This is the Director General of Reporters Without Borders. It says, "What are your thoughts on the?" He's asked this question. What are your thoughts on the Xenia Fedorova affair? So this is before this decision that made by the French government. Well, perhaps this affair had to happen to realize just how porous our information landscape is. Oh, I love it. We're doing the gibberish now. How porous our information landscape is. Having become a very regular contributor to a media group that notably owns a channel on digital terrestrial television without any real opposition, even though there's opposition everywhere and throughout the mainstream media, Xenia Fedorova has carved out a far more central place in the French public debate than when she headed RT France, which closed in January 2023. She's promoted and protected by people who vigorously but fallaciously defend freedom of expression. Fallaciously, it is exactly freedom of expression. It's just these, views, you don't like them. Okay. Too bad. I mean, that's, nobody's protected from hearing views that they don't like. Defend freedom of expression, ignoring what freedom of the press implies in terms of independence and honesty. So ignoring what freedom of the press implies in terms of independence and honesty. And I don't think there's ever been, again, this is nonsensical. No one has ever accused the press of being independent and honest. Everyone's known the press is not honest. And everyone knows the press is not independent. The press is owned by very rich people, where it used to be very rich individuals. Now it's largely very rich corporations. They've never been honest. No one's ever accused the press of being honest. But nonetheless, we have something called free expression. This Reporters Without Borders, wants to pretend as if that there's something called journalism, and that he kind of defends journalism, which he defines. He defines what is journalism. He defends journalism, but he doesn't defend anyone else. Even though they're obviously doing journalism, even though they're obviously journalists. No, he doesn't defend them. He just defends journalism. In other words, he's only willing to defend those who agree with him. Well, that's that's very good. Fine. But don't call yourself Reporters Without Borders. The one thing you have very rigorous, very rigid borders as to whom you will defend. And so anyway, this she's promoted now who vigorously defend freedom of expression, ignoring what freedom of the press implies in terms of independence and honesty. These are the Trumpian strategies. Now we're under Trump now, so Trump is on board. These are the Trumpian strategies reminiscent of J.D. Vance's claim to free speech. Xenia Fedorova is not a martyr for violated freedom. She's a mouthpiece for Kremlin propaganda, even if it means broadcasting lies. And then goes on, the issue raised by this case is not the freedom of expression of journalists or media owners. It is the issue of quality information. Quality information. So you have to have the quality. What I deem as quality. The issue is quality of information. Now you see, this is the way this is. You want to define it away because one says freedom of there's freedom of information. Freedom of information means there's a lot of information out there. Some of it is correct, some of it is incorrect. A lot of ideas and opinions out there. Some correct, some incorrect. Some we just don't know. No, but we have to have this quality, the quality. She doesn't have quality. Unlike Le Monde. Le Monde, of course, has quality. And anyway, it goes on. Is quality information serving the public based on professional methods. Journalism is an act of freedom and responsibility, which entails both rights and duties. It is paradoxical that civil liberties invoked by those who could not enjoy them invoked by those who would not enjoy them in Russia. That's not neither here nor there. What's in Russia is in Russia. We're talking about France now. We're not talking about Russia. We're talking about freedom of speech in France. We can talk about freedom of speech in Russia at some other time. But it's obvious, and this is true generally of the Western media. They would much rather talk about freedom of speech in Russia. Well, of course you would. Naturally, it's always easier to talk about something that's somebody's doing something wrong somewhere else, long way away, rather than addressing the problems nearer home. I mean, obviously, you'd rather not talk about the threats to free speech in France. No, let's talk about Russia. That's nice. That's all, and let's just talk about Putin. And so here's continuing with this great champion of free speech. And then it says that Russia, Xenia Fedorova expresses concern about a supposed lack of freedom of expression without mentioning that the press is muzzled in Russia. She's under no obligation to do so, and particularly as this is something that French journalists do on a regular basis. You go to France 24, that's what they talk about, how little freedom there is in Russia. I mean, there's no shortage of views on how little freedom there is in Russia. That journalists have been forced into exile, and that so many of them, like Anna Politkovskaya, who was assassinated in 2006, have died doing their jobs. So, okay, since we don't know what happened in her case, you really, have no business start throwing around accusations. Nobody really knows what happened there, and no one's got very far with any theories about what happened to her. Have died. There's a lot of, very dangerous people in Russia. A lot of people. So there's a lot of violence in Russia. But anyway, you can talk about that. But that still doesn't address the problem of free speech in France. I mean, that it's always this the tu quoque defense, which is, well, what about what somebody else is doing? Okay, somebody else is maybe doing very bad things, but that doesn't really address the issue of journalism in France. Anyway, so this it continues here. And then, how do you distinguish between facts, opinions, and pure propaganda? I like this question. This is Le Monde asking this question. Xenia Fedorova's mentor, Marguerite Simonian, head of Russia Today, took excerpts from a French interview with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and used them to promote the regime. The clip has been viewed over 1 million times. So then it goes, well, in addition to destabilization operations carried out using fake accounts and bots, we are witnessing prime-time interference in media outlets renowned for their reliability. or large audiences. We now know that some tactics are doomed to failure. When Sergei Lavrov removes his earpiece during an interview on France 2, however tenacious and talented the journalist opposite him may be, he delivers his speech without any possibility of correction and exploits the interview for propaganda purposes. Xenia Fedorova's regular and unchallenged appearances on C News and Europe 1 are one such tactic, biased from the outset. Her current discourse remains unchanged compared to what she said during her time at RT. And then it goes on. Propagandists combine the two dynamics of Russian soft power, the denigration of France and its leaders through systematic criticism of democracies, and the reiteration of discourse consistently favorable to Russian interests. Well, okay, as opposed to what you do, which is just the other way around. You spend all of your time denigrating everything in Russia and extolling the glories of French democracy. Neither is exactly journalism, but you're just doing exactly the same thing. But what he suggests here, that somehow, well, we practice real journalism. We have democracy here, and we believe in free speech. And then when one says to him, well, if you believe in free speech, why do you want to ban this journalist? Well, that's because it's not really speech, it's not really journalism. I mean, it's not, speech and journalism is what I define speech and journalism to be, and that's their view. It's a little like back in 1999 when NATO bombed RTS, radio television of Serbia, and they killed 16 people in that bombing. It's in April 1999. And NATO's first line of defense was, well, it's a radio television Serbia. That's not doing journalism. That's part of Milosevic's propaganda machine. That's not real journalism. Real journalism is what the BBC does. Well, that's real journalism. You're a real journalist. You know what they say to the BBC reporter. Yeah, I respect you, Mr. BBC, because you're doing real journalism. They don't do real journalism. As it happened, they had a bit of a problem with that because claiming that they're not real journalists and we just killed them was not a very convincing argument. And NATO's lawyers kind of got back to NATO and said, well, that is a war crime. Whether you call them journalists or you don't call them journalists, you basically targeted a bunch of civilians. So that's a war crime. So NATO then kind of changed its story. No, we weren't really hitting it because it's this is part of Milosevic's propaganda machine. No, heaven forbid. We would never dream of attacking radio television Serbia because it's part of Milosevic's propaganda machine. Heaven forbid. We would never do anything like that. No, it had strategic importance. It was all part of the communications infrastructure of Yugoslavia. That's fantastic. The problem with that argument, that the NATO's second rationale, well, if that's the case, why didn't you ever try to hit it again? If it was such a crucial part of the Yugoslav communications, logistics infrastructure, why did you not try to attack it again? Of course, they hit it because they did it for they just thought, hey, this would be spectacular. We would take out Milosevic's propaganda machine, and then they had to beat a hasty retreat when the NATO lawyers told them, well, you can't just do that. Whether you regard them as journalists or you don't regard them as journalists is neither here nor there. You hit a civilian target. But this apparently this is a little bit too sophisticated for this Reporters Without Borders Director General. Anyway, he continues. Anyway, go on. Anyway, this is let's. Then here, this was very interesting because originally when when the EU sanctioned RT, and Sputnik in February 2022, Reporters Without Borders was not happy about that. They came out initially, saying, well, it's kind of counterproductive because if we do it to them, they're going to turn around and do it to us. It's not really the way to do it. So here's they issued this handout. This is on February the 28th. RSF views the EU ban on RT and Sputnik critically. And they say Russian statements are a central element of Putin's propaganda and thus a key part of his war of aggression against Ukraine. Nevertheless, Reporters Without Borders considers the EU's planned ban on two media outlets counterproductive. RSF fears that the negative impact of such a ban on reporting from Russia will outweigh the intended short-term effects. And so they have this RSF executive director says, there's no question RT and Sputnik are propaganda channels of a deeply repressive state. The Russian media apparatus censors, spreads disinformation, and believes itself to be engaged in an information war. So just pile on. Criticism of Putin or the government is absent from their programming. It's absent. Well, most state television, most countries have state television. And on state television, you know what? There isn't a lot of criticism of government. There's a lot of criticism of others. So just like, the BBC or France 24 or Deutsche Welle, there's an awful lot of criticism of other countries. If you want to get criticism of Russia, you want to criticism of Iran or whatever, go to Deutsche Welle. You're not going to get too much criticism of the of your own government on Deutsche Welle or France 24. That's the way it works with these with state broadcasters. It's not going to get it, but somehow they want to suggest that Russian state broadcasters are unique in criticizing others while not offering very much by way of criticism of their own government. No, that's exactly the way it is. Yeah, it's funded by the Russian government, and the Russian government doesn't like to fund criticism of itself. Just BBC doesn't like to fund criticism of it. The government, the British government, doesn't fund criticism of itself, or the French government, or the German government. And anyway, there's no question that RT and Sputnik, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, nevertheless, we view a ban on RT and Sputnik critically. The influence of these media outlets on public opinion in Europe is limited, but the anticipated Russian countermeasures could make independent reporting from Russia more difficult or even impossible. The treatment of Deutsche Welle, among other things, has shown that there will be countermeasures. So that's the only reason why they object to it. They say, hey, we're down for any ban on Russian disinformation, Russian propaganda, but we're worried that they might retaliate against us. But in no time at all, Reporters Without Borders changed its tack completely, and suddenly it began to agitate, not for ending the sanctions, but for tighter enforcement. You have to enforce your sanctions much more vigorously than you have been. So here's Reporters Without Borders. It says, Russian propaganda bypasses EU sanctions. Accessing RT's website in France is, quote, child's play. The Kremlin's disinformation poses a serious threat. It's posing a serious threat to the right of reliable information. I didn't know there was such a right to reliable information. I mean, there's a right to information. Whether it's reliable, that's in the eyes of the beholder. Reporters Without Borders urges France's broadcasting regulator, ARCOM, to firmly, urgently, and effectively enforce the EU sanctions against RT. So imagine, this is Reporters Without Borders. Suppose didn't we heard one of the earlier slides we talked about how it's in the business of defending journalism, it's in the business of defending freedom of the press, and here they are saying we are urging France's broadcasting regulator to firmly, urgently, and effectively enforce the EU sanctions against RT. And then here we have, it sounds too simple to be true, yet all you have to do is type RT en français into Google, and the mirror site of the Russian propaganda channel's French language website appears among the first results. If you click on the displayed web address, you will be directed to a copy of RT's site, which gives access to all its content. Today, the 30th of September, you can even watch the Russian channel's programs live from France without any VPN tool. And then he says, RT was in and then 2.5 years after the ban, RT continues circumventing these sanctions with great success and few resources. Although the channel is no longer accessible by satellite or cable, its website is still accessible even though it is included in the EU ban. So here is, again, Reporters Without Borders indignant that people can still actually, okay, they can't get it by satellite, they can't get it by cable, they can still get the damn bloody website on their computers. We have to do something about that. This is Reporters Without Borders. This isn't some politician hack, the Glucksmann guy. This is Reporters Without Borders, outraged that you can still access the RT website. And then goes on. So this is again the quoting him. This is this Thibault Bretin. What are European sanctions against Russian propaganda worth after 2.5 years of war in Ukraine? Judging by our experience with RT's website in France, their impact is dwindling to nothing due to a lack of strict enforcement. Right now, accessing the RT website is child's play, given the serious threat. It's a serious threat to the right of reliable information posed by the Kremlin's disinformation. We urge Arcom to apply the European sanctions firmly, urgently, and effectively. And then the problem was flagged by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in February 2024, after its journalists managed to access RT's website without a VPN from the Council of the European Union's headquarters in Brussels. Notice how, without the slightest trace of irony, they quote Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which are completely bankrolled by the U.S. government. Their goal, their explicit objective is propaganda on behalf of the U.S. government. That's what it's there for. That's what Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty is there for. And they quote it. They quote, they pointed this out. Thank you, Radio Free Europe, for pointing this out. That actually people can access RT. Well, that's terrible. And then he goes on. RT's presence is the most blatant, yet the non-implementation of European sanctions by internet service providers and search engine companies such as Google is a larger problem. So this is Reporters Without Borders. It's a larger problem. According to analyses by a network of academics, experts, and media professionals that was sent to Arcom and the French Treasury last January, versions of RT in English, German, Spanish, and Arabic are accessible in France without a VPN on over 50 sites and social media accounts. Surveys carried out by the Comité Diderot shows that RT's situation is similar, if not worse, in countries such as Germany and Portugal. And then, anyway, it continues. And then here, Reporters Without Borders, and then they're not going to let this go. They become obsessed with RT. And here, from Russia to Serbia, how RT spreads the Kremlin's propaganda in the Balkans despite EU sanctions. And then here you got, thanks to the Serbian government's grip on the media and favorable political environment, RT uses its Belgrade office to adapt the Kremlin's narrative before disseminating them across southeastern Europe. And Reporters Without Borders calls on the EU. So there is Reporters Without Borders calls on the EU and its member states to hold Serbia accountable for hosting Vladimir Putin's factory of lies. So that's, and then here, this is actually, this is rather very funny. In September 2024, Reporters Without Borders asked RT about the mission of its new Balkan Bureau and its relationship with the Russian government. RT's Moscow headquarters replied immediately and sarcastically, quote, "We have established RT Balkan with the sole purpose of annoying Reporters Without Borders." The provocative political answer shows how RT positions itself as the antithesis of an organization that defends a free, independent, and pluralist press. So, this provocative political answer shows how RT positions itself as the antithesis of an organization that defends a free, independent, and pluralist press. So, as we've seen in all of this, the one thing Reporters Without Borders doesn't do, the one thing it doesn't do, it has no interest in doing, is defending a free, independent, and pluralist press. It just says these things. Oh, well, we represent free and independent and pluralist press. But we don't like other things, the things that disagree with us, because those are propaganda machines, factory of lies, and whatever, disinformation. So yeah, you can ban those things, but we continue to be the champions of a free, independent, and pluralist press. Then so it goes on that here. Anyway, thanks to RT Balkan, this is the head of RSF's EU Balkan desk. Thanks to RT Balkan, the Kremlin's war propaganda is thriving within the EU's border. So you think, how does it thrive within the EU's borders? Serbia is not in the EU. In Serbia, a nation surrounded by EU members and candidate countries, Russian narratives are packaged for local audiences, okay, before being distributed across the regions. So across the region, they might still get RT Balkan. I don't understand how they can do that, because the region, well, I mean, it's not all within the EU. I mean, so yeah, that I think that's their problem. Yeah, that among those countries that have still not been inducted into the EU, so presumably maybe they can still access RT Balkan. That's, you absolutely must not be allowed to do that. And then this is kind of an interesting one, also in Le Monde, the Bolloré protégé spreading Russian propaganda in France. Now, what's interesting about this article is that it just reveals just how long this propaganda machine about Xenia Fedorova has been going on. I mean, this is a real drumbeat. This article was published about 2 months ago. And the thrust of this article is that you have to do something about her. You need to do it. Le Monde, journalist, a journalistic outlet, pleading with the French government, you have to do something about this Xenia Fedorova. And then, so it says, on May the 9th, she seized the opportunity on her X account. She accused Europe of rewriting history by trying to erase the Soviet Union's role in the victory of 1945. All of which is correct, and all of which we have pointed out, I think, here on the Gaggle, but other people have done it, that, yeah, that there is a relentless revisionism that prevails in Europe that somehow minimizes the Soviet Union's role in the victory of 1945. In fact, the Soviet Union played the crucial, decisive role in the victory in 1945, and yet you wouldn't get any idea of that if you limited yourself to Western media that instead focuses obsessively on this one event, the German Soviet non-aggression pact in of August 1939. So that's the only event that they want to focus on. Everything else they just ignore. And so this is all outrageous. And on C News, she suddenly accused one of the three Baltic countries, all of which share a border with Russia or Belarus, of glorifying Nazism. If you look at Latvia, there is a parade every year of former Nazi legions, which is true. Anyway, and then here they quote a historian from the University of Helsinki, clearly an objective source, who says Fedorova is simply repeating an old, well-worn narrative of Russian and Soviet propaganda aimed at discrediting anyone who tries to break free from the Russian sphere of influence or who has succeeded in doing so. All of this is, of course, completely untrue because, as we know with the Baltic states, the Soviet Union, I think foolishly, but nonetheless, they made that decision in 1991 to let the three Baltic states go. The Baltic states, however, then made it their raison d'etre, the very basis of their existence, to be essentially just bulwarks of Russophobia. Like, I'm absolutely obsessively Russophobic. All of their utterances, day and night, are filled with this hatred of Russia. So this whole thing was started by them, by their obsession. They left the Soviet Union in 1991. 35 years have elapsed. No one stopped them from leaving. They left. No one stopped them from leaving. And yet you wouldn't get any sense of that from all the Kaya Kalases and all these creatures who run those countries, because all they can ever talk about is how we need to go to war with Russia. But there's Finland, and again, same goes with Finland. Finland had a very amicable relationship with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, but now, ever since it joined NATO, it seems to be in the forefront of a kind of an obsessive hatred for Russia, which didn't exist all those years during the Cold War. It just didn't exist. Anyway, Russian propaganda exploits a painful chapter in Latvian history. During the Nazi occupation, Latvian men were conscripted into the Waffen-SS, and there were Nazi marches in Riga. So that's a very interesting revision here. They were conscripted. They didn't want to. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to join, even though everybody knows. Of course, they wanted to do it. Of course, they were. More than happy to be conscripted into the Waffen-SS. That's why they have these parades every year celebrating the Waffen-SS. They were happy with it because they hated the Russians, and that's what they were encouraged to do. They were conscripted. It was against their will, absolutely against their will. This is the reporting. This is the good reporting. This is the reliable information that Reporters Without Borders approves of. And said that chapter has long been closed, but on May the 9th, Fedorova sought to exploit it. The commemoration she refers to is a private gathering. The display of Nazi symbols is, moreover, strictly forbidden in Latvia. So you just said it's a private gathering. It happens every year. And then she says, oh, it's forbidden by Latvia. Well, if it's forbidden by the Latvian authorities. How come it takes place every year? It's a private gathering. Well, it's a private gathering. You try having a private gathering of Nazis in some other countries. Let's say a private gathering of Nazis in France. See how they respond. How would the French respond to a private gathering of Nazis? Oh, it's a private gathering. What would they say if there was a private gathering of Nazis in Russia? Oh, it's just private. I had no authority over Russia. Well, yeah, it's a private gathering, but the authorities make no attempt to stop it. Anyway, this really Le Monde continues. Fedorova's falsehood. So Le Monde just simply accepts this Finnish, whatever the hell she is, this Finnish professor, without any question, just accepts her account, however ludicrous and obviously self-contradictory. Fedorova's falsehood inevitably calls to mind the stories that in late 2021 and early 2022, Putin used to justify Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which he claimed urgently needed to be denazified. To see this Russian propaganda openly repeated in French media, even though Latvia is a close ally of France within NATO and the European Union, confirms the success Russian disinformation campaigns are having in France. Well, it just may be that it's an argument that you haven't addressed. A number of these countries have a Nazi problem. Ukraine has a Nazi problem. And it's there, and it's the Western media, not the Russian media, it's the Western media themselves have reported on the Nazi problem in Ukraine. They say, hey, there are these guys, they're in the Ukrainian military, and they have swastikas. I mean, it's a little bit of an embarrassment. They have swastikas. And then we have Zelensky reburying Melnik, one of the leader of OUN M. The rival organization to Banderas. The Ukrainian military renaming themselves after the UPA. So this was so egregious that even Poland couldn't take this anymore. But apparently, no. I mean, it's all just Xenia Fedorova. It's all this one woman who just makes it all up just makes it up. This is the Polish government that withdrew an own honor bestowed on Zelensky because it was just so egregious that you're honoring people who massacred Poles. That's not Xenia Fedorova. That's the Polish government. Oh, Latvia is a friend. We don't have. Latvia every year has commemorating Nazis, but it's a private gathering. It's private. It's just private. That's fine. They can just have a good time. Don the swastikas and so on. Remember these aren't veterans because there are no veterans. I mean, they're all dead now. So this is a younger generation that continues to celebrate privately, of course. That continues to celebrate the Waffen SS in Latvia, and the authorities make no attempt to stop them. And it's not just a private gathering; they go to the cemetery, and at the cemetery where the Waffen SS people are buried, they have some commemoration and celebration of the great deeds of the Waffen SS. But it's all just Xenia Fedorova. I mean, she just makes this up. It's all Russian disinformation. And let's continue with this good journalism from Le Monde. Anyway, then C News offered no response to this provocation. So apparently you have to respond to this. Appearing entirely converted to the new Fedorova-inspired orthodoxy. Back in March 2025, when Le Monde reported on how Bolloré media outlets were openly siding with Russia, Star C News presenter Pascal Prud devoted an entire editorial to defending both the channel and himself against any accusation of pro-Russian shift. And it says, no, inviting Xenia Fedorova for her book is not defending Russia, it's about hearing a different voice that defends the Russian perspective. He retorted. And anyway, I reminded her that Russia is the aggressor in the conflict, that I do not consider Russia among the democracies that are opposing Putin could land you in the regime's prisons. Um, it's okay. That's why he says it's just a different point of view. Anyway, it says, today there are no longer such attempts to distance himself from the boss's friend. The same prode now does not hesitate to declare on his talk show, I think we need to negotiate with Putin. That's that. What a shocking, horrific, terrible thing to say. I mean, that is Kremlin propaganda through and through. I think we need to negotiate with Putin. It may be an idea after 4.5 years to bring this war to an end. With Putin the aggressor, a guest on the show asked in astonishment on May the 19th. He's not the aggressor. That's where the discussion starts. The host argued because when what happened with NATO happens and so on. Now, the whole idea that, of course, you don't negotiate because he's an aggressor and whatever. Well, anybody who says that, you think, well, fine, then this what you care so much about, that Ukraine has to win this war, and you don't want to negotiate with an aggressor. Then the solution is very simple. You need to go to Ukraine, put on the uniform of the Ukrainian army, and go to the front. I mean, that's as simple as that. I mean, if you want to continue this war, don't expect others to fight your war for you. You have to go fight your own war. If you don't want to talk to Putin, you don't want to talk to Russia, you think it's the most important thing in the world, the most vital goal of humanity is the defeat of Russia and the victory of Ukraine, then you need to go and fight. And not appear on talk shows and then go to a fancy Parisian restaurant afterwards. That's not acceptable. And then have long known for carefully staying out of the political arena, France's broadcasting regulator, Arcom, has received formal complaints. So the broadcasting regulator has received formal complaints about the lack of honesty and rigor in the information presented on May the 9th by Fedorova, falsely accusing Latvia of glorifying Nazism. Falsely accusing Latvia. I mean, imagine the outrage. They're falsely accusing it. When even this Finnish professor said, yeah, there is a glorifying of the Waffen-SS. Arcom is also reviewing statements made the following day. It is the West who decided to prolong this conflict. It's amazing that you have that somebody is reviewing this. Well, that's a point of view. You can agree, you can disagree. Why is a government regulator examining? How is a government regulator qualified to make this to make a call on whether this is a permissible or a non-permissible thing to say? I mean, I happen to think that is a correct position. It's NATO has been continuing this war, escalating, aggravating this war for the goal of which is to achieve a strategic defeat of Russia. That's my view. You can disagree with that. I think my view. That's it. I don't quite know why a government regulator is examining this, and as if they have any real qualifications to decide whether this is acceptable or unacceptable. I mean, this is journalism. We have government deciding what is acceptable and unacceptable speech, not about something that happens in France, but about something that happens in Ukraine and about Russia. So government then decides, well, what you said is acceptable, what you said is unacceptable, and therefore we're going to take measures against you because what you said was unacceptable. So and the journalists are sort of clapping their hands instead of saying, hey, why is a government regulator intruding in what should be public debate? But anyway, you can see here it discloses that the pressure was building up on the government to get Xenia Fedorova out of the country. So Arcom is also reviewing statements. In addition to these two complaints, Valérie Ayer, we've already talked about her, the president of the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament, sent Martin Ashdari, president of Arcom, a list of a dozen false statements. False. We, Le Monde, know that they're false statements made by Fedorova in the Bolloré media outlets since May 2025, each of which directly mirrors the official talking points of a foreign power engaged in a war of aggression against a sovereign European state. All of these complaints are currently under review. And then a number of intellectual figures have also spoken out. Of course, intellectuals are always in the forefront of locking people up for views that they don't like. They're always, boom. Who's the first person who says we need to lock up X? It's always an intellectual. I'm a public intellectual. I have things to say. So, look. So, even before the recent Latvian episode, philosopher Pascal Bruckner is another one of these absolute frauds. I mean, it's like, Bernard Henri Lévy, Andre Glucksmann. I mean, they're complete frauds. We can't take any of these people seriously. Philosopher Pascal Bruckner, one of the authors of Grasset, who chose to make a dramatic exit from the publishing house after Bolloré dismissed editor Olivier Henno, openly accused Fedorova in an interview with Die Welt of being Putin's voice and Bolloré a lackey of the Russian president. Bolloré is uncultured. Oh, that's good. Oh, uncultured. Yeah, he's a very uncultured person. He doesn't read. Okay, they say he doesn't read. I mean, that's bad. He doesn't read. He doesn't read. What he wants is power. So he imposed his protege, Xenia Fedorova, Bruckner said, who has traveled to Ukraine many times and has long been passionate about Russian propaganda. He imposed her at Fayad. He implored her. He imposed her at C News at Europe One. She is the voice of Moscow. Bolloré is a Putin's man. What matters is not Christianity. It's not immigration. It is Putin. So this is this clown Pascal Bruckner. Anyone who's familiar with his writing, I mean, so it's a load of codswallop. I mean, I was aware of him from the 1980s. The Tears of the White Man. I mean, it's like, as with all French intellectuals, there's some. They make a few good points, but it's all wrapped up in gibberish, and so almost all of it is unreadable. So the few insights are not particularly original. Other people have made those insights and have done it far more articulately and incisively than they have. But they kind of present it like the tears of the white men. But and he got a big thing. Oh, the latest French intellectual. I thought there was only Bernard Henri Lévy. No. Pascal Bruckner is another one. All right. Anyway, but he apparently his think now is Putin, as it is with this French intellectual. Like, well, what's your big thing now? Well, it's Putin. Anyway, so then and then the French Foreign Ministry has also raised concerns about Fedorova's growing influence. An internal memo seen by Le Monde details how Fedorova's positions align with official Kremlin rhetoric on Ukraine, NATO, and Europe. So imagine you have to have so there has to be an internal memo. Somebody in the French Foreign Ministry writes a memo and says, her positions align with Kremlin rhetoric on Ukraine, NATO, and Europe. And then on May the 15th, French Foreign Minister let his ministry's highly popular X account, French response, respond with its characteristic sharp humor. Its characteristic sharp humor. Can you grovel a little more obsequiously, please, next time? That's not, I didn't find this obsequious enough. Its characteristic sharp humor to Fedorova's accusations of corruption against Ukraine. In Russia, French response wrote, the system is simpler, no scandal when there is no one left to investigate. Okay, all right, it's very sharp. Anyway, the foreign minister prefers to pass the buck to the interior ministry, and it was the interior minister and the Paris police prefecture that in August 2024 renewed Fedorova's residence permit for 10 years. Le Monde revealed this in March 2025 because Le Monde has been on the case for many years. Why was this permit extended even though the former head of RT France was already spouting her Russian invader propaganda regarding the attack on Ukraine? It's a mystery. And then it says, and then she says, my status in France is legal, reviewed, and approved by the relevant French authorities, and based on my current professional activity for Canal Plus, as well as on my proven experience in creating and running a TV channel in France. Fedorova replied to Le Monde by email, driven out of France through the front door, this channel funded by Russia and its former director have returned through the back door by way of C News and so on. The propagandist Fedorova is making her influence reign here, Putin's influence. Okay. And then that's it. So she's now under house arrest. And I guess she wears an anklet bracelet, but she has to report to the police. And so liberté, égalité, fraternité, we can still get these stirring words. On the Bastille Day, and Zelensky was there, coalition of the willing. It was really, really quite thrilling. Anyway, let's now go to Gaggle locals page to talk to our community. These are the people who keep the Gaggle community going, the people who care about the dogs, and the people who actually, believe in the work we do here. So really, really appreciate all of the Gagglers, and as I always say at this time, please, if you want to me to answer your questions, if you don't like what I say, if you want you have comments, criticisms of anything I say, please join the Gaggle community and post your comments and criticisms on our locals board. I'll see them there, and I promise I will address any comments and criticisms you have. Very easy to join. The Gaggle.locals.com. And it's a great community. It's really interesting, stimulating people who post all sorts of fascinating information, and I can't begin to tell you how much pleasure I get from interacting with the Gaggle community. So if you want to do that, thegaggle.locals.com. Anyway, first question from Denaki, who is our a Gaggle stalwart, has been here for quite some time, and always every day posts the most fascinating information. He's a prodigious researcher, and so really grateful for everything that he provides us. And I think it makes the Gaggle a really first-rate news source, because there's just so much information, particularly the Denaki posts, that isn't available elsewhere, but you can get it at the Gaggle. So again, another reason to join the Gaggle, because it's a news source a lot unlike any other. So thank you so much, Denaki. And Denaki says, could you imagine something more humiliating than the Soviet Union getting its refineries bombed, than a third world shithole country without any government for 15 years like Libya publicly inviting you to refine your products on its territory? This is even more humiliating than the ridiculous Potemkin-esque painted submarine at the Russian Navy's anniversary ceremony. Well, I think you have all very fair points. It's kind of, yes, it is humiliating. I do think though that well, you know, I have to think that this probably isn't going to go on for that much longer. Unlike Scott Ritter yesterday, I know Danaki wasn't very happy with the interview, and I think a number of Gagglers were unhappy with the interview because Scott, as is his wont, makes a lot of very categorical predictions, and has been doing so really since February 2022. And many of these predictions are in stark contradiction to predictions that he had made only a few weeks earlier. To be fair to him, he does acknowledge that his predictions are often a little odd with the predictions he had made before. But he did make a prediction yesterday, which I don't find conclusive. And that is that somehow Russia will be able to win this war in Ukraine without having to extend this war elsewhere. And this is obviously in contrast to what he himself said the last time he was on the Gaggle, which was, I guess, a few weeks ago, when he said, yeah, Russia will indeed extend this war beyond the territory of Ukraine, because ultimately these drone attacks on the refineries, these drone attacks on oil storage depots were taking a hit. Russia was taking a hit, and that while it wasn't necessarily affecting the front lines, this was a real blow. I mean, Russia cannot go on just simply getting hit like this, because then Russia ceases to be a great power. You're a great power, and the demonstration of that you're a great power is that you don't get hit. You're the one who hits others. You don't get hit yourself. And so he said, I think Russia will have to extend this war beyond the territory of Ukraine. And then, and I don't think he made this point, but that's the point that I would make, it will be up to the powers of Europe to decide what they want to do. Do they want to escalate? Do they want to move towards a full-scale war with Russia? Or would they rather seek some kind of a peace talks? And I think the great advantage of extending the war beyond the territory of Ukraine is that it will focus minds. It will focus minds outside of Ukraine. It'll focus minds in Germany, where Germans are by no means enthusiastic about this war. They'll focus their mind and said, do we really want to escalate this? Do we really want to make this a full-scale war between Germany and Russia? It's like the third major war between Germany and Russia in a little more than 100 years. Do we really want to go there? Who knows how Germans will answer the question? Who knows how the Europeans will answer that question? But I think Russia has to go there, because the alternative is to allow itself to be humiliated. Just as Danaki is pointing out, you're just being humiliated by getting bombed. You're getting your refineries hit. And while it may be that these attacks on refineries are not affecting the battle lines in the Donbass, Russia is taking a hit. It stopped exporting refined petroleum products. Yeah, it's still exporting crude, but it's not exporting refined petroleum products. So that's a blow. So Scott who was saying, "Oh, Russia can win this without extending the war." I have to say, I don't really agree with that. I think if they don't extend the war beyond Ukraine's borders, this war could go on for several more years. And I don't think Russia can just go on fighting this in several more years. I just think It's just taking such a heavy toll. The war needs to be brought to an end, right? This is it's obviously the heavy toll in casualties, but it's also a heavy toll economically. So Russia has to essentially bring it to an end, and the way to do it is by escalating it and then forcing the NATO to come to a decision. What do you want to do? Just stop saying, we're at war, we're not at war, just as we were talking earlier. Oh, we're at war, we're not at war. No, now you're going to say, okay, we're now at war. Is that what you want? You want to be at war with Russia? And I tend to think that the answer will be no, that they don't want to be at war with Russia. There's no support for this. Nobody wants, people are having a very comfortable life. And just the idea of going on a war footing and getting really badly clobbered. I mean, Europe is going to, go to war with Russia. You're going to take a real pounding. And I just don't. I have my doubts that the Europeans really are ready to take such a pounding. So I think Russia needs to escalate, and I think needs to extend this war beyond Ukraine's borders. Whether that happens, I don't know. Who knows whether that's, but I have to think that this is being very actively discussed in military political circles. That we have to wrap this up. We have to bring this thing to an end, and we can only do it by escalating. Anyway, thank you so much, Danaki, and now our good friend Cynthia. Cynthia, of course, our film expert, film scholar. With an amazing, extraordinary knowledge of film history and film production, and always helps Gagglers to get a better grasp of cinema history. With all her really interesting postings, and particularly during our weekly screenings. So another reason to join the Gaggle is you get the weekly screenings, always something very interesting. And we only ever screen good films, and these screenings are really great experiences because Cynthia provides a really intriguing, learned, informative background commentary on the films that we screen. Everything from the actors, the script, the production, everything that went into the making of a film, and then the whole the aesthetic and the relationship with one film and another film, and the relationship between cinematic genres and cinematic eras. Cynthia masters these things in ways that nobody else can, and so thegaggle.locals.com. You get your weekly screening, and you get information from Cynthia. And so this week we're featuring one of the really great films of Hollywood, one of the great political thrillers that Hollywood's ever made. A very dark film made in 1962, Advise and Consent, based on Alan Drury's bestseller a few years earlier, and it's a crackerjack film. I mean, it really is. It's very, very, very suspenseful, very dark. Everyone comes out of it very badly. There's really no one admirable in it. There aren't any really, moral lessons from it. It's not like other films which we've featured, like 7 Days in May. Very good film, but obvious in its moral and political line. Here there is no obvious moral and political line. It's just very, very dark in the way politics is in Washington. So Advise and Consent, watch the film, read Cynthia's comments. It's a great experience. Anyway, so today's Cynthia's comment is: Robert Barnes argues Iran is striking U.S. bases in Iraq because the U.S. is using an old covert playbook, using Ukrainians like the CIA once used Cuban exiles. After the Cuban Revolution, the CIA recruited exiles like Felix Rodriguez, who fled Cuba and had ties to the anti-Castro group. They became U.S. intel assets. backing covert operations, regime change, and insurgencies. Rodriguez later took part in Che Guevara's execution, despite CIA's orders not to, then testified before Congress during the Iran Contra hearings. And then Cynthia goes on. Bond says the same model is now being used with Ukrainians who've appeared in Iraq, parts of Africa, and Syria during Assad's overthrow. He claims Ukraine's history of arms and human trafficking, money laundering, and biolabs made it useful for such operations. He also points to Laura Loomer touting her grandfather's oligarch status while ignoring allegations of corrupt ties after the USSR fell. Barnes warns this could widen war with Iran and urges Trump to cut ties with Ukraine, including Loomer. Well, that's interesting. I mean, it is fascinating the way Ukraine has inserted itself into this war. I mean, we talked about it at length on Tuesday. I mean, so what Ukraine has done is first to claim that Iran is effectively a co-belligerent with Russia against Ukraine. So, in other words, Iran is providing arms to Russia. It claimed that the cargo ship in the Caspian was somehow providing arms. Either Russia was providing arms to Iran or Iran was providing arms to Russia. It wasn't entirely clear which way this transfer was supposedly taking place, but Ukraine hit this cargo ship. And then there's the other claim that Zelensky is making, which is that Iran is hitting American bases, American strategic assets in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf, thanks to the intelligence that Russia is providing Iran. So, in other words, Zelensky has said, well, we are really at the heart of this because we're fighting Russia. Russia is aligned with Iran. Iran is your enemy. This is his claim to Trump. Iran is your enemy. And Iran is our enemy. We're fighting Russia, and we're fighting Iran as a co-belligerent. You're fighting Iran. Russia is a co-belligerent. Our two enemies are one and the same. Iran and Russia are our enemies. We need to join forces. And that's Zelensky's claim. Now, so far, Trump has seemed to be a little cold as to accepting this argument. He hasn't been very enthusiastic about what Zelensky did. Now, as always with Trump, you can't really take seriously anything he says. I have to think that Ukraine's attack on that cargo ship, that Iranian cargo ship in the Caspian the other day, was done with the authorization of the United States. This is a major escalation by Ukraine and getting itself into this war. And you have to think, okay, it's very unlikely that he would have done something as serious as this without getting the okay of the United States. So that's my view. Now, Trump, who is a very devious person, is a very, very deceitful person, pretends, as he often does, that he really didn't have anything to do with it. He's not really very keen on this idea. I'm not buying it. I think there is Trump continues to align himself with the neocons. He continues to align himself with Laura Loomer, with Mark Levin, and all of those people. And they're the ones who are pushing this line that the war against Russia and Ukraine and the war against Iran are one and the same. So they're basically aligning themselves with Zelensky and saying these two wars are one and the same. You can't defeat one without defeating the other. And I think that those are the people that Trump is currently listening to. And so while he may have sounded unenthusiastic in public to this argument, that's just for the time being. I'm not at all convinced that this argument will not eventually prevail with with Trump. I didn't hear this that Barnes had said this. I mean, it's an interesting um, analogy. The Cuban exiles, there is there is a sort of there's a slight um, the way because the Cubans did get themselves involved in a variety of wars in Latin America. These Cuban exiles during the 1960s, lending themselves to American foreign policy, particularly in Bolivia, where indeed Guevara was killed. And of course, these exiles carried out assassinations. They were, really quite nasty assassinations. Particularly Chilean opposition leaders and so on. Ukraine is certainly involved in a number of these wars, particularly in Africa. We talked about this on Monday during the live stream. That the Trump administration seems to want to get involved in this war in Mali. Obviously, the goal is to thwart Russia. I mean, yeah, we're going to go to Mali, we're going to fight ISIS, Al Qaeda, blah blah. All rubbish. Sebastian Gorka is behind all this, but Ukraine is already involved, and Ukraine is the one that's kind of pushing the line that, hey, we're fighting against Russia. We're trying to thwart Russia's plans in West Africa. So that may well happen, that somehow Ukraine and the United States will align themselves in West Africa against Russia. So yeah, I think it's interesting that Barnes says that. I think there's a lot of truth in that. It's an interesting analogy. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Here is Marty. Always good to see you, Marty. Oh God, Marty always introduces himself with some truly grotesque, horrifying photograph. And this is a photograph. I've not seen this. This is Macron. Not sure when this photograph was taken. He's just sitting around in a very casual way, and some very comfy. Looks like a very comfy apartment, and luxuriating. Yeah, that's pretty. That's grim. Very, very grim. Anyway, and it says, "Merry Thursday, George and Gagglers." Well, very good to see you, Marty. Thank you as always for all of your really great postings, even if those photographs are a little on the it's hard not to retch at times with these photographs. At least we don't have Kaya Kalas today. But thank you, Marty, for all of your postings. And then here we have Aristotle. Always good to see you, Aristotle. Welcome back. Aristotle says, I've been watching some of your recent 1960s black and white films. Even social critiques from that period seem to reveal a normality that makes them almost idyllic today. A running theme is that there really was an unshakable belief that progressive liberalism was going to build us a brave new world. I think so. Quite thought-provoking, though, that seed in your last film was so similar to Lindsey Graham, shows that political options are normally between bad and bad. I think it's very perceptive what you said there about the assumption of these 1960s films is indeed that liberal progressivism will prevail, that somehow the enemies of liberal progressivism. On the one hand, there are the communists. They're obviously bad guys. The Soviets, they're kind of generally bad guys. Also, bad guys are these sort of various reactionary types, the racists. Um, but ultimately there is this this do-gooder liberalism in the middle, which is fighting communism, fighting for civil rights. They will eventually succeed. The anti-civil rights, all the Dixiecrats, they will lose, but also the communists will lose, and also will lose the McCarthyites. Because they're very crude, they're very primitive, and so on. Advice and consent. It's kind of interesting because the progressive liberalism is by no means so obvious, and which way it's going to go. It's you can read it anyway, whichever way. I think I don't want to give the film, the ending of the film, away to anyone who doesn't watch it, but it's open to interpretation. That the ending. I mean, progressive liberalism, um, at the time, while anti-communist, nonetheless was in favor of détente and arms control. So that you didn't like the Soviet Union, you didn't like the communists, but you didn't want to blow the whole world up either. So the embodiment of liberal progressivism would be somebody like Jack Kennedy. I mean, he'd be the hero here. Kennedy, anti-communist, but believes in some kind of modus vivendi with the communists. And that was, that's the paradigm. That's the path to follow. Ignore the Dixiecrats. They're against civil rights. Ignore the McCarthyites. They're very primitive, and ignore the crazy generals who want to blow the world up. But somehow, so you've got a lot of people that you need to ignore. But ultimately, the sort of the Jack Kennedy people will prevail. I mean, that's a sort of the Hollywood liberalism of the time. I mean, for want of a better term, this was Cold War liberalism. It's the very essence of Cold War liberalism. And I suppose people believed, mostly that it would prevail. In the end, as the 1960s went on, people lost confidence in Cold War liberalism for all sorts of reasons. The war in Vietnam wasn't going particularly well. Civil rights wasn't going particularly well at home. People were getting very agitated. And so that the notion of Cold War liberalism, the sort of the Jack Kennedy liberalism, people began to get very disillusioned with it. So if you look at, say, 1972, by 1972, 10 years after the advice and consent, people think, I don't think Cold War liberalism is really likely to succeed. But I think these Hollywood movies did subscribe to that, that notion. So yeah, all of these bad guys, the crazy generals, the Dixiecrats, the McCarthyites, the communists, they will all be defeated, and somehow this wonderful Jack Kennedy liberalism will prevail. It was a kind of a fatuous hope, but I think, as you said, that was the ethos of the Hollywood cinema of that time. But watch the film. I mean, everyone, I think, all Gagglers should watch this film. Read Cynthia's comments. I think it's well worth it. Anyway, and then Aristotle says, sad about France becoming a stooge of the United States. Well, it's been like that for a while. Europe really has fallen spiritually. Yeah, absolutely. It's a joke, and the state of French intellectual life is a joke. State of French journalism is a joke. I mean, it's really. I mean, there's a new film about de Gaulle that's just come out in France, and apparently all Frenchmen in the political and cultural world are embracing it. They're all, we are all Gaullists now. We are all Gaullists. No, you are not. It's like, Lloyd Benson, said to Dan Quayle, "You are no Jack Kennedy. So you are no De Gaulle. You may say, De Gaulle, De Gaulle. No, you are not De Gaulle. You are pathetic. You're far too pathetic. You're not De Gaulle." But the French want to delude themselves that that they are De Gaulle. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you very much, everybody who joined me. Thank you so much for all of your questions and comments. Really very interesting, very stimulating. We'll be back over the weekend. We're going to do some more podcasts. And then on Monday, Peter and I will do our joint live stream, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And then Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I do my solo. Hope to see all of you then. Have a good night. See you soon. All the best. Bye-bye.